Taking place nearly 2.5 centuries before the original series, The Lost Canvas tells the story of the previous holy war between Hades and Athena. The main character is still the Pegasus Bronze Saint, Seiya's previous incarnation, Tenma, which also means Pegasus. Throughout most of his life, he has been protecting his pacifist best friend, who is also a painter, alone. After demonstrating his potential while protecting his friends from a flood in front of Doko, the Libra Gold Saint, he is taken to the sanctuary to be trained to become a saint. There he reunites with another childhood friend, Sasha, who is the current incarnation of Athena. Then after 2 years of training, Tenma becomes the Pegasus Bronze Saint, and shortly after, Hades has come to restart the war, but possessing the body of Alone, Tenma's best friend. Now Tenma is off to see if he can defeat Hades and still save Alone. Obviously, in comparison to the original series, Lost Canvas cuts right to the last story arc. Not only is it just a prequel, it's a very excellent addition extension to the original source material. I thought some things in the last Hades OAV arcs in the original series needed to be elaborated upon, and Lost Canvas expands on those certain specific aspects. Of course, I would talk about them, but, they'd be spoilers to not just, the Lost Canvas, but to the OAVs of the original Hades series itself. On the outside, Tenma is of course a lot like Seiya, but has his own unique distinctions and qualities. In the original TV series, there was of course more of the team concept, and Seiya is portrayed more as a leader, while the team concept is kind of, it's still there, but not as heavily emphasized. And Tenma himself isn't exactly a lone wolf, but of course he just has partners, but of course they don't really have that development as a team yet. To compare the two characters in a nutshell, Seiya is kind of more like Son Goku from Dragon Ball, while Tenma is more like Rama and Inuyasha in that kind of way. They're both fighters, but they just have different kinds of ways of expressing themselves in those manners. What I also found interesting is that the current incarnation of the Unicorn Bronze Saint, Yato, has a lot more used in comparison to the original Unicorn Bronze Saint, Jabu. The relationship between Yato and Tenma, they kind of have a Rama and Ryoga and Inuyasha and Koga kind of relationship. They are very similar, and because of that, they can always be at each other's throats. Despite that, I find it very surprising how quickly their relationship develops in the course of the series, from, the bitter rivals to cooperative partners, and, by the time the series ends, it's like their differences are almost gone. While throughout the duration of Rama and Inuyasha, there's always conflict between those, Rama and Ryoga and Inuyasha and Koga. The series for this season is pretty well evenly paced, and I like how it focuses on certain characters on certain episodes, and it's not just exclusive about Tenma and Yato and, some in Sasha. Some of the Gold Saints have their own central episodes, and you get to learn about them. Though they will only have short appearances, they do make significant contribution and establish to the progression of the story. The villains are still pretty much the same from the Hades OAVs, but still have their own unique personalities and qualities, in which they all stand out. The OAV ends at an understandable place, and of course a sequel has been confirmed, and the way it ends just makes you wish to watch that sequel already. I say this is a very good introduction the same way the Hades Sanctuary arc respectively was, and for that, I give the story and characters an 8.5 out of 10. As one can see, the character design isn't done by Kurumada Masami. However, he allowed a shoujo author, Teshirogi Shiori, to do the art for this respective title for her original manga. The anime respectively follows that art style from what I've seen of pictures on the internet and magazines, and of course, as you can hear, I've yet to read the manga of Lost Canvas. The anatomy of the characters are still, for the most part, pretty slim, with some buff guys here and there. The costume designs are, of course, very faithful to the original manga, so nobody can fault it there. The hairstyles are a bit thinner in comparison to Kurumada's style, but it still works in contrast to the bodies, faces, and heads. The design of the villains are just as dark and yet still glossy as the Hades chapter OAVs, but yet some of the characters have their own unique movesets and gimmicks. As for the action, it's pretty much more fluid, and there's still more emphasis on direct hand-to-hand combat, as opposed to relying on special moves. However, with a much lesser character roster, the matchup appeal isn't really that present here, except in just a couple of fights. Of course, Tenma will have the Pegasus Ryuseiken, and it's presented in a different angle, and not much recycled animation is abused in this. The action is still explosive and exciting, and like I said before, doesn't go to a point where it gets ridiculously over the top. And for that, I give the art and animation a 9 out of 10. Sorry about the cough. What really took me by surprise is the opening theme, The Realm of Athena by Urox. Of course, in the tradition of Saint Seiya, it is rock with a good set of guitars as a hook. But the song itself is sung in perfect English. And the qualities in terms of lyrics is what made Pegasus Fantasy and Megami no Senshi so presentable, and reflects what the show is about. And it's not just some song that's promoting the artist or song, it's about the show itself, and Saint Seiya is one of those rare products to have songs like that. It's, very good anyway and has its own distinct energy that reflects the overall atmosphere of the series. The general background music is of course new and is very intense at the right times and, uses acoustics during softer moments. A lot of the percussions in those acoustics used is very appropriate to the setting in the context of the time and place in which the series takes place in, so it's a very good touch. As for the voice acting, I'm not at all familiar with the voice actors of Tenma and Alone. Kakihara Tetsuya's respective Seiyu, does a great job in making Tenma that arrogant but yet caring fighter. It really reminds me of Suzumura Kenichi's portrayal of Taito from Jushin Enbu, a character very similar to Tenma. Shimo Tohiro's the voice of Alone Hades, I think has to be the performance that has to get the most credit. One moment, you're the most purest person on earth, and then all of a sudden, you're the god of the underworld. And, of course, I think he does a great job of, playing that guy, like, for 1 minute, is convincingly someone who believes in non-violence, and then the next moment, he's a god and doesn't give a shit about life. However, a familiar name that most fans should know is the voice of Hirano Aya, the voice of Suzumiya Haruhi, as the voice of Sasha/Athena. Of course, in comparison to that character, she's a different kind of leader, and, she does take charge in this more serious situation. She's appropriately authoritative and commanding as that character, and not really, spontaneous or crazy or random like Haruhi. She's very serious and calm, and the influence of Han Keiko's original performance is there. But of course, the original voice cast is still, of course, the best voice cast you could ever get for an anime. And, as for this respective series, I give the voice acting and music an 8.75 out of 10. Well, to overall conclude, do you need any previous experience with Saint Seiya to watch this OAV? It does help a lot. You can watch this with a fresh mind and still enjoy it, but on the downside, it can potentially spoil the original series in some respective aspects. But as I said before, if you do have that familiarity, then when you come into this series, when certain aspects are touched upon, it's a nice touch that they're elaborated. By the time you finish this series, you feel like it's truly beginning. And, all I can say is that this series gets an overall score of an 8.7 out of 10.